Okay, so moving from where I currently live to where I used to live in York, we moved to a monument called Clifford's Tower. Now, Clifford's Tower is a stone-built uh, little castled keep at the top of a Norman Motte and Bailey mound that is certainly a local monument. It's very well known in York. It's known as the Eye of York. There's a car park to one side of it, of this sort of the mound, and to the other side there was well, there was a court and prison building, which is now the York Museum, the Museum of York. So it's a little heritage hub in York. It's also a stone's throw from the Jorvik Viking Centre as well. And Clifford's Tower is an English heritage site that has recently come into the news because English Heritage are proposing to build at the bottom of the mound, the entrance to Clifford's Tower, a new visitor centre. You don't particularly seem to like these plans, do you?
It's not just me, it's a lot of people, including the Council for British Archaeology.
Yeah.
Um, as you say, the Clifford's Tower is a wonderful example of an urban castle. York, obviously, as a city, dates back to at least the Roman time, at least from the Roman period. It was the legionary fortress of the Ninth Legion, then Sixth Legion. Uh,
Iboracum.
Eboracum,
Hmm,
absolutely.
hmm, hmm.
Um, it then became the centre of the legionary fortress. Then became a Christian minster, and
Iorthwick.
and Viking Jorvik.
No,
Yeah,
no, no, no,
absolutely.
no, no, no. See,
Oh, sorry.
it was
Yep,
Eorthwick,
Eorthwick.
and then
I'm
it
sorry.
was
Yes,
Jorvik.
which then became Jorvik when the Viking. Basically, it is one of the most, one of the richest historical centres in the country, and particularly rich in terms of the amount of York's heritage that is either still visible or has been discovered by archaeology in the last 40 years.
Yeah, yeah.
The Jorvik Centre being probably one of the most important examples. So Clifford's Tower fits into that, um, has to be said, uh, tourist offer,
Well, it does. But you see,
heritage
but
offer.
there's also a slight oddity here, and that is that
Mm,
because York is so rich in terms of its history, some of
yeah.
that has been very deliberately actually preserved. There was during the Industrial Revolution, the local corporation insisted that new business wasn't allowed in the city, so that it kept its historic character. This monument, Clifford's Tower, in any other place would be a honeypot. It would be draw people in. In York, it's actually a bit of a side attraction, oddly enough.
Yes.
And so, in some respects, I can't blame English Heritage for wanting to formalise a visitor entrance and make it look a bit more like a heritage site to visit, as opposed to something which is tagged onto a car park or which is simply connected to the York Museum. You can't blame them in that sense for doing that, because currently the entrance to Clifford's Tower is basically off a pavement. You come up out of the car park onto a pavement and then up some steps. There's no sense of entering a site, if you see what I mean.
But what the plan does, well, I mean, I think you can criticise it on two levels, and I think we have to say, uh, at the moment, their English Heritage have planning permission from
Hmm.
York City Council to build this thing. Um, the row now is that it's going to the courts for a legal review because of allegations that, for example, the extent of basementing in the new building wasn't fully disclosed in the planning application.
So basementing being
The
sort of excavation of a
parts of the
new floor
building that are
level.
excavated into the ground,
Hmm.
into what is undoubtedly archaeology in one of the most archaeologically sensitive cities in the country, as we've just discussed.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's partly because by definition this is a man-made mound, so
Absolutely.
you're going to find stuff in there. Yeah,
Absolutely, and also if you go under the moment you go underneath the current ground surface, you're going to be into the previous history of York,
yeah. Hmm.
which, as we've said, goes back at least to Roman times.
Yeah.
So, um, it the other thing that people say, it actually, if you look at even the very neat CGI plan, and I'm looking at the CGI picture, and I'm looking at it at the moment. Um, to my eye, the building um, that English Heritage are proposing is actually intrusive. What you've got at the moment is these grey steps leading up to the grey-white stone of Clifford's Tower itself. At least that's how it would appear on a sunny day, and the CGI is depicting a sunny day. But at the bottom of you have this sort of row of this concrete roof held up by concrete pillars that just sit in the. It looks like a breeze block has been dropped onto the edge of this green mound of the motte. And at the moment.
No, this is interesting to me because you are normally a proponent of striking, harsh architecture. And I use the word harsh in the aesthetic sense, not in
brutalist modernism.
Exactly, yeah. So in the past, you not so subtly have teased me about, for example, the brutalist student union building in Durham.
You mean the wonderful Durham house that has the cascade of concrete?
Cascade of concrete, yes, the cascade of concrete. And it's interesting here that you're not particularly happy with this. I mean, but just to be devil's advocate in that sense, would you rather that they built some sort of Disney-ish pseudo medieval facade, in so much as this monument, historically speaking, would have had walls that came down the side of from the keep down the motte. Down the motte to form a sort of an enclosed bailey area, essentially castle walls that continued and encompassed some of the flat surrounding the hill. Would you rather that they risked confusing people in terms of what is the monument and what is not?
No, my problem with it is twofold, and you're right. I do appreciate modern architecture, but I appreciate good modern architecture in the right context. And and I'm not going to get into the argument about Durham House again, but in this case, I think what they're doing is actually imposing something that is pretty average in terms of architecture, if not downright ugly, according to your point of view. And they're imposing that on something that is really, it's an existing public green space. It's an area where people could, on a nice sunny day, they could sit and read a book or have a picnic or chat to their friends and have and take 5 from their heritage tour around York.
I suppose again, as a sort of a former resident, what I would say is that I have stood where this thing is proposed to be built, and I would say that the space, yes, people do, and probably indeed on a day like today, possibly are picnicking at the bottom there, but also as well there is a sense of there's a I don't know, there is a it's a permeable liminal zone. It's really hard to define what I mean. But when people are at the bottom of the steps waiting to go up, maybe they're waiting to meet someone, they find themselves in the way of people wanting to walk on the pavement. They find themselves causing people to walk around them into the road, which causes a hazard if there's a bus dropping off maybe some kids for the museum. It is a problem, if you know what I mean. And in some respects, I can understand how having something there that has, this is the entrance, this is the way in, this is where you wait to come in, will just help that whole area. It is in that sense a green space, but it's also, because the steps come all the way down to the road currently, it's also a space that often becomes a bit bunged and people don't quite know how to traverse the space, if you know what I mean. So something is a good idea, I would submit. Something is a good idea.
I think I would have to take issue with you, because I think there's another problem with this particular development, and it's one that's been identified by the people who are campaigning to have the plan dropped or changed. And that is the question that English Heritage, which is the arm's length charity that the government set up when it split the former English Heritage, which also had a regulatory role. The regulatory half became Historic England, and the side that looked after the National Monument Collection, in England at least, became English Heritage.
Hmm.
That stopped English Heritage from having any kind of research and conservation role, and made it effectively a second national trust. It was a land. It became a landowner, a monument owner, and it is under government instructions to become self-supporting by the early 2020s.
Yeah.
Therefore, they have to make money.
Yeah.
This is actually about monetizing Clifford's Tower in a way that's more extensive than it is already.
Well,
Uh,
of course it is, of course, and I think, and this is the other thing as well, is that I've talked about this in the past as well. I don't agree with English Heritage effectively becoming the second national trust in Britain. I think that's a terrible idea. I also I can understand, but that said, though, I have, for example, I have worked when I was at York, when I was living in York. I have worked for the Orbic Viking Centre, so I understand the need, as it were, to sing for your supper. I get that you need to,
oh yeah, yeah.
you need to do, if you become, as it were, the self-preservation society, and we have talked about this in the past, and we'll probably talk about it again in the future. The merits of that sort of setup in terms of becoming essentially a membership-generating organisation. You have to wonder what that means for the good of the monuments that are in your care. Absolutely. But I suppose, again, just on the side of people who have to deal with the monument, a friend of mine, for example, worked there for many years, and I visited him regularly when he was there. He was a member of staff for English Heritage, and the facilities weren't adequate. You know, the little English Heritage shop was smaller than my office is, for example. It was basically a small shed where you could just hang some things on the wall, some postcards, this kind of thing. And in terms of the booth, for both for taking payment for people to come in, but also actually, for example, controlling the space in terms of safe access, this kind of thing, again, wasn't really adequate. It's I see where you're coming from in so much as an insensitive solution, and arguably this is an insensitive solution, is not a good solution. But I cannot help but think that since English Heritage has to become a membership generating machine, has to get footfall, in sites like this, arguably for the good of the national organisation, it needs to be able to maximise and formalise people's entrance into that monument.
Absolutely. And I think it's only fair that I should quote a media report which quoted Jeremy Ashby, who's the head curator of properties at English Heritage, who said, who told the press, we're investing in one of York's most iconic landmarks to tell the fascinating history of Clifford's Tower and its place in the city for generations to come in a way that's never been told before. We've been looking at several different options, and we welcome members of the public to drop into consultation and to get their views. Getting an insight from the public will help us to reach a decision on how we make these improvements to one of York's most famous and most beautiful landmarks. They had the right intentions, but the problem is twofold, I think. Firstly, there is this issue of the planning application and how, and we talked about it in our earlier package about planning, how transparent the planning application actually was, because it now appears that the excavation for the new building is more extensive than people have been led to believe.
Yeah,
that will come out in the next weeks and months as this case goes forward. I think there's another issue about Clifford's Tower, though, which is that it ain't just another castle.
No.
It's part of England's dark heritage, because what it's most famous for is the York pogrom of 1191. It's one of the darkest passages in English history, when the Jewish population of York took refuge in the wooden Clifford's Tower that preceded the castle that's there now, the stone castle that keep that's there now, and were burnt alive by a mob, an anti-Semitic mob.
Well, they were supposedly offered a referendum, an ultimatum. Sorry, Brexit. An ultimatum on their lives. They was basically told, kill each other or we'll kill you. And my understanding is that in the 80s and 90s, I do believe, the remnants of that massacre were uncovered outside the city walls, and there's been something of a reconciliation between the international Jewish community and York, but to this day especially the Orthodox Jewish presence in York is nil, more or less. People simply haven't returned. So yes, it is very much a uh, significantly recognised monument internationally for those reasons. Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think therefore to promote it as just another English heritage castle, I'm sure they wouldn't do that,
No.
but it is more problematic than many other English heritage properties. And I think the other thing as well is that um, the interior of the place of Clifford Tower is actually it's one of those castles which is effectively a shell,
Yeah.
um, and
Well,
therefore,
and that is reflected in some of the proposed designs as well. Actually, if you're interested to see at home, I suppose,
indeed.
you can sort of see how they're thinking about installing a sort of a frame inside the shell. Yeah.
Exactly, and something you can pop down inside to enable access to the higher portions of the walls,
Yeah.
or something, and maybe give an impression of where the floor levels were in medieval times.
Yeah.
Absolutely no problem with that. I think
Hmm.
that's exactly how you should present a monument like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's imaginative. It gives access. It gives modern architects a chance to interact with the past.
Well, but also,
Um,
sorry, it's something that I find really exciting about that kind of presentation of a monument is it also makes windows available to people. Views, perspectives on the landscape that haven't been available since that floor came out in the 16, 17, whatever. It's very exciting from a human level to think, oh, I can look out of this window, when they do that. So that's quite cool. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. As I say, I just think that the plonking a visitor centre down at the foot of at the foot of the mound, when the mound is actually a quite significant monument in its own right,
Mm.
um, personally, I feel is not appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and I'd just like to just underscore this segment by saying I have been, to a certain extent, devil's advocate here. I definitely understand that this is not necessarily the best solution. If you were to do this, for example, at Warwick Castle, where they have a very prominent mound, or Windsor, for example, if you tried to do it there, it simply wouldn't be allowed. So, okay, okay.